own Armin Georgian. Armin, what is in this appeal?
Well, it's really a call for more collaboration between governments, but also between private sector entities and civil society. The French government is basically trying to bring together various different processes that have been going on through the UN or the OECD, but some of those have stalled. Just a point about the timing, though. This is all linked to the World War I centenary and the Paris Peace Forum that took place this Sunday, because the thinking here is that after World War I, technology kept advancing, but multilateralism got weaker, and so you had a Second World War with even more devastating technology, but the political structures were not there to prevent the Second World War. So this is kind of what the French government's take is, if the lessons are not learnt from that, then we're going to have a situation where cyber weapons basically run amok, and there won't be the political structures or the multilateralism to hold it in check. And
the oversight.
And just think of, some of the events that were mentioned at the Peace Forum, because there was actually a working group on cybersecurity. The massive attack last year, which disabled 250,000 computers in more than 150 countries. And what was said at that forum was, this could be just the beginning. What about a massive attack on the electricity grid of a major country? What would that do to hospitals, emergency services, and so forth?
Not to mention electoral processes. Yeah. It's interesting because every time you have one of these discussions, Armin, you're reminded, and we're speaking, by the way, on the same day where Germany's endorsed France's call for a digital tax we're reminded of the fact that, well, the internet, to a large degree, is owned by the United States.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's very significant that the US didn't sign this Paris call.
Not yet.
Not yet. There are 50 nations, 150 tech companies who have. It's interesting that you mentioned Germany just there, because Angela Merkel, of course, had a prominent role in these commemorations at the weekend. And in fact, the ideas expressed in this Paris call for trust and security in cyberspace, they're going to be explored further in Germany next year at the Berlin Internet Governance Forum. But as you mentioned, 3 notable absentees so far: the US, Russia, and China. They clearly don't see this Paris call as being in their interest. But before we jump to conclusions about, sort of who's good and who's bad, black and white, let's remember that France has its own record when it comes to industrial espionage and also Big Brother type surveillance powers. Now, you might say, well, that's a different thing from actual cyber attacks on civilian infrastructure. But this Paris call, the wording had to be very careful, and the people who drafted it had to tread very carefully to accommodate or reflect the fact that Western governments use the internet for offensive purposes, to use a military metaphor. So it's not completely black and white, but certainly this Paris Declaration, it does focus on cyber attacks and also on election interference. So perhaps it's not entirely surprising when you look at some of the countries that haven't signed, that probably felt themselves to be actually targeted in this declaration.